We are taught, culturally taught, that everything has to be done through conflict. You have to go in there, you have to fight for your side, and somebody will win and get what they want. And that is weird. And everybody has compromise. The concept of compromise is wrong too, because we don't think, oh, compromise means finding somewhere we're actually legitimately in consensus. Compromise means everybody loses.
The Rational View is a weekly series hosted by me, Dr. Alan Scott, providing a rational, evidence-based perspective on important societal issues. Hello and welcome to another episode of The Rational View. I'm your host, Dr. Al Scott. On this episode, I'm going to be chatting with a politician. Now, in terms of voting preferences, I've often found myself wanting to vote green, knowing the environmental crisis we're facing. However, I've never been able to stomach the outright anti-science, anti-nuclear stance of the Canadian Green Party. I have found one Green Party member who does not outright slag nuclear. In fact, they are a candidate for the Canadian Green Party leadership. Dr. Amita Kuttner is co-founder of Moonlight Institute, a non-profit organization that seeks to create frameworks for an equitable and just future, taking into account the realities of the climate emergency, as well as technology and decolonization. Amita holds a PhD in astronomy and astrophysics from the University of California, Santa Cruz. Their research focused on black holes, wormholes, quantum effects, and the early universe. Amita ran for Canadian Parliament in 2019 and served as Critic for Science and Innovation for the Green Party of Canada from September 2018 to February 2020. Bringing forward policy on artificial intelligence and emerging technologies. Amita ran for leadership of the Green Party of Canada in 2020 on a platform of justice, science, and resilience. Dr. Kuttner, welcome to The Rational View.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on. You are a multi-talented individual.
I have done a number of things in my pretty short life to date.
Yeah, your website says you're working for an equitable and just future. I'm impressed with your commitment and the breadth of your work. You've certainly experienced more than your fair share of a lot of things. I also heard about your parents and the tragedy that happened there. Could you share with our listeners something of your background and your journey?
Yeah, I'm happy to speak about that too, because it definitely has influenced how I got to where I am today. So I'll start with that. I was away, luckily, in boarding school when I was 13. I had just turned 14. And my home in North Vancouver was destroyed by a mudslide. It killed my mother and permanently injured my father. He had a number of absurd injuries, including 23 broken vertebrae, a torn aorta. So he had strokes in the hospital to save his life and has never been able to work since and had resulting brain damage. But the mudslide itself was actually the responsibility of government in the sense that they really weren't supposed to build there and there were permits allowed and then it was kept secret and they didn't actually check up on the work necessary. So that gave me a strong lesson in both the influence of extreme weather on how we actually kind of put at risk a lot of people. It also influenced how I think about risk and what we need to do to mitigate those things in the future and take climate change seriously. But it also gave me this concept that government doesn't particularly exist to stand up for people and that we should be working harder to make sure we have a government that is actually there to serve us. That's that. And then I went off and followed my dreams and my passions and got my PhD in astrophysics and then realized in grad school, as many grad students do, I think that I wanted impact and turned towards policy and politics and tried that out for a bit. So here I am, having done a bunch of political things and then right now working on policy in a nonpartisan way.
Oh, okay. And that's with your Moonlight Institute?
Yes, it is.
I see. There's so many things I want to ask. As a fellow astrophysicist, I'm interested in your experiences in the experiences of women and minorities in STEM fields, especially. Is something I'm thinking about exploring in future podcasts. And I'd be interested to get your impression as to, what your experience was like going through a STEM field and doing a PhD, and, what hurdles did you see and what should be done to make women feel welcome in STEM fields?
Yeah. And I mean, now I don't identify as a woman, but I certainly did throughout my time. And I have actually said, I went through my degrees as a woman in physics, whether I was or wanted to be or any of that. It was not up to me. And that was actually one of the biggest lessons for me was about systemic culture and that external view of me that I did not have control over. And this is, I think, separate from identity, because this applies to everyone in the sense that there are biases in the system against people. And so it didn't matter how at home or not I felt, I was judged differently because of my exterior. And so there are basically so many issues to cover there. And I did a lot of work for especially gender diversity in physics when I was getting my PhD. And it was rough. And I think the biggest lesson that I learned is that it really doesn't come down to identity, but it comes down to marginalization and the experience of marginalization. And you can't tell from somebody's identity or their face or whatever what they've experienced, because there's so many intersections of privilege and marginalization. So we tried to do work to make sure that every single student had the ability to flourish and show up with their capabilities and not be trodden down by the culture or the expectation or the way of thinking, genius culture in particular. But it's interesting because I don't think, in a sense, the field was ready to reckon with the real question, which is around genius culture. And
okay. That's a new term for me.
Okay, let's talk about it. So there's so many different aspects. Like there's actually having experienced harassment. There's actually having experienced racism. There's the random things that you experience and that show that you don't belong here. But then there's also the work that I did advocating for people whose experiences I don't relate to or share, and knowing that I don't know what they're like. All I can do is empathize and do the best to represent what they say they need, and actually approaching any sort of conversation I believe about equity and justice, diversity, inclusion should be done from that. You don't particularly need to know what somebody's going through to honor their experience and to listen to the changes that need to be brought about. But genius culture is one of the things I believe at the core of it, other than the fact that the academy and the institutions have been there for a long time, and the backdrop of those institutions is white supremacy and patriarchy, whether we like it or not. And science has not always been clean. It has been used to perpetuate racism and create racism in a lot of cases. And that's a reckoning we also have to have. But beyond that, there absolutely is this concept that your abilities are innate. And you either are brilliant or you're never going to succeed. And this is something that actually influences everybody. And, I had cishet white male students that dealt with this as well. And they came from backgrounds that did not give them the confidence and did not give them the education they needed to start out in university. And so they too experience being pushed out of this and not having the opportunity to learn, to grow, and become amazing researchers, which they probably could become. And so this applies to absolutely pretty much everybody. It's one of those things that's made worse for a lot of people who have especially intersections of marginalization, because they show up and say you just don't have access to the mathematics, the education in high school, or you were a non-traditional learner. I was a non-traditional learner, but I figured it out, and that's partially because of the privileges that I had in having parents with computer science degrees, a father with a mathematics degree. So I had my own interpretation view of the universe, ability to do mathematics that let me not be influenced by the fact that I didn't get along with the academic system. But
I see.
People coming into that, they're immediately told basically, if you can't understand this the way it's presented right now, you're inadequate, you're inept, you don't belong, and you'll never be able to get it. And instead, we need to flip that around. We need to say, actually, you can learn, you can grow. It's a matter of hard work, perseverance, And yeah, everybody starts with a certain level of aptitude, but that does not determine where you can get to, what you can understand. And there certainly isn't only one way of understanding it. But that, I noticed, it starts and it exists within undergraduate culture all the way through into professorship, where you have professors evaluating applications for people and saying, well, this person is good and this person isn't, on metrics that actually do not line up with success of research.
Okay, interesting. That would be interesting to look into. So the metrics they're using are not supportable.
Yes, and it's fascinating because we actually had colloquia about this. People are doing research about success in graduate school and other fields in general, and they find that GPA and GRE scores don't actually correlate with success.
Interesting.
It's incredible, and what they find is grit, and grit is difficult to measure. It takes a lot more work to determine and find, but it relates to that, having a growth mindset, knowing you can learn, persevering, pushing through, developing resilience to the things around you, but also being willing to continue. And
yeah, the quote of Edison was genius is 97% perspiration, 3% inspiration, something. Yeah, no, that's very useful, because people often get into this. I see where you're coming from. People often get this innateness of IQ. People like to take the IQ test, and so I am this slots people for life effectively. When you take your IQ test and figure out where you fall in the hierarchy of genius.
And the IQ test has got an incredibly racist history. So, which I've read a little bit about, but it's not a good idea. And I think that idea of hierarchical intelligence is inaccurate. And it's so many times this comes up. People say, oh, you must be brilliant. You must be a genius. I'm like, well, sure. I probably have some basic aptitude for certain things that allowed me to get where I was early on or whatever. But the truth is, no. I worked hard and I cared and I was fascinated with it. I was continually fascinated with it. Yes, I have a tendency, I believe, to push forward and to persevere, and I have a determination that I don't recognize in everybody else, but that certainly isn't intelligence.
Okay. So, as much as I'd like to explore your astrophysical research, I think I'm going to leave that for another podcast. But I'm really interested as well in the policy aspects and the politics and the Green Party and your work as a politician. Now, coming at this as a scientist with a scientific background, you're aware of the evidence and the risk of climate change, and we all want to get rid of fossil fuels as fast as possible. For most scientists I've spoken to, nuclear energy seems to be a very useful tool for this job. The Green Party in general, however, seems to be strongly anti-nuclear, and I've sent questions to Elizabeth May and to my representatives, and I've never had a response on the issue. They've never engaged with me on this issue. But now I have you here. Can the Green Party accept nuclear energy as a tool in the fight against climate change?
It's a very, very interesting question, because I think there's my opinions, and then there's whether that's possible in the Green Party. And what I see from having run with them and from having paid attention, from having run with them and having paid attention to what was going on in the party in terms of discourse, it's not singular-minded. There is an internal dialogue, a difference of opinion, and a discussion about it. Historically, the party has been very staunchly anti-nuclear. And I don't always disagree with that, in the sense of I think that there is a lot more hope and potential in the future of nuclear than I've recognized in the past. And that's not because I have any fear or disagreement with the technology, but rather historical implementation, and especially the way it's been implemented in Canada. And that being the companies that run it, the irresponsibility of the way that we've handled nuclear waste storage. And that's not to say that I see that as just a huge issue on its own, but particularly how it's being done has been an issue. And so the arguments that I would hear consistently against it are cost, which to me also has to do with management, and basically project management, and waste storage, in the sense that there is a justice issue here. There has been a tendency to store nuclear waste on indigenous land and unceded indigenous land, and pose risks to people that really shouldn't be done, and also near waterways. And this gives an idea and a sort of a basic distrust of the possibilities. And then there is the issue of not understanding the technology and the actual risks of things, where you get into things like, well, we're phasing out coal, and it's like, you have a lot of radioactive waste, nuclear waste, basically, from things that are not nuclear plants. There's that huge conversation, right? And then on the other side, I also heard the other thing. Nuclear is the only thing that we should be doing. We should not be worrying about any of these things. We should just go full steam ahead. And I kind of was in the political lens here, as somebody who's like, yeah, let's explore nuclear technologies. There's a good place, but also let's be careful. Let's take the precautions necessary. Let's address the concerns, both environmental and justice concerns. But let's not write this off, and let's certainly, work it into our plan for sustainable energy long term. And I think that there's a couple different questions there, because I think that there's a couple different timescales that people are talking about. People are talking about like immediate mitigation versus long-term sustainability for grid. And I think those are different conversations and have potentially different answers. But that's not where I saw the conversation. I saw people on extremes. And I was just like, all right, can we meet in the middle? And so my answer to that question is there is actually a possibility that we could be open to this. But what needs to happen is a very nuanced, open, scientific, and also heartfelt conversation before we get
And that's one of the
anywhere.
reasons I started this podcast, was to find that middle, because for reasons I don't want to go into, I mean, the social media has polarized so many discussions, and it becomes echo chamber on the left versus echo chamber on the right, and the two don't cross paths, and no one steps out and actually discusses. Nobody looks for common ground. Nobody discusses things. And that's
exactly. I completely agree with that emotion. That is also how I felt about political discourse. And I think one of the things that gets lobbed at the Green Party is we're centrists. And I personally take issue with the political spectrum in general. So I kind of want to throw it out and just have a conversation. But then that's exactly it. I don't like that polarization. I would like to have a conversation and about what we're actually trying to do together and what our values are. And so that's actually how we tried to run the campaign and the leadership race, and how we tried to bring policy forward, which was, okay, let's actually do this from a scientific perspective, in the sense that we actually declare our assumptions and state our intentions. Because intentions are not a thing, of course, in science. Well, kind of are. You are always biasing whatever you're doing. But in applying a scientific method to something that isn't science, so it's policy development, you want to declare what your intentions are. Because what I heard all the time, and it applies to nuclear as well, because it must be evidence-based, it must be science-driven, is that people talk about evidence-based policy like you can use raw data and get yourself policy. No, you can't. You just can't. You have to be attempting to solve some problem. You have an overarching mindset that you're putting into it. You have values that you're following. And if you don't admit those assumptions, you don't admit your intentions and your goals, you are going to get a product that you do not have control over. And the example I often use is that of housing. And so I've heard it. People were like, well, following the evidence, we have to build this many units. I'm like, all right, but why? Why here? They're like, well, we need the supply. I'm like, okay, so let's talk about the framework that you're using here, the assumptions you've made, and your intentions. What's your goal? Your technical goal is to have enough units to house the number of people who are unhoused. But you're not talking about giving people a home. you're saying that our economic system functions perfectly, and you're also saying that you're assuming that the infrastructure will support it and that you don't have to worry about that. And that's what happens in a lot of places in terms of development, is there's not this like other conversation. But if you were to approach this instead to say, like, I believe that housing is a human right, I want everyone to have a home, you will end up with a completely different solution. And you say, like, I value community for people instead of just setting up basic units or whatever. So that, that sort of thing. And that's a basic example. But that is the framework that we wanted to approach everything with. What system are you working in? What do you understand about that system? What do you want to change about it? What are the assumptions you're making? And what's your intention? And so this is how I would approach, say, energy policy as well, in that, we talk about the climate emergency, we talk about energy futures, you talk about energy balance, and then you also talk about the other things that lines you're not willing to cross. So here's the issue with cleanliness, storage, and all these things, but you also get it on the table for everything else that you're using, like renewables.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's often apples and oranges when people are talking about these things, and I've looked a lot into the nuclear and the debate between nuclear and renewables, and there are two different discussions completely. And the dual standards, as you mentioned before, about coal and the radioactivity and the coal ash. I mean, if someone were to bring a bucket of coal ash from the dump and into a nuclear station, they would have to bury that in a geological repository. They wouldn't be able to put it back in the dump because it would set off the alarms. They have to be below background.
Yep, exactly. And all the arguments I hear about mining, for instance, is the same thing. You need a lot of, metals whose current mining standards are not good enough and are causing human rights problems for most of your renewables. And it's also an indigenous rights issue. The answer is just, I think we have to do it right in all cases. And you have communities who say, we don't want nuclear here because of a whole host of reasons, including we're on a shoreline. And that is also an important consideration. So, like, community acceptance and permission is always necessary.
Yes. Yeah. You take your time. You engage with the community. There's no urgency about burying nuclear waste. It doesn't pile up quickly. We've been going 60 years and it's a parking lot at this point. So we have the time to properly consult with the communities and find communities that are interested in hosting this. And I think that's a good way to go forward.
And that's exactly it too, is that there's been, I think, so much misinformation and so much irresponsibility, in the sense that as far as we've had most of these technologies, there has been an implicit allowance of basically continued marginalization, and the suffering has been perpetuated for a whole bunch of different populations. So we're looking at mining on indigenous land across the entire planet, often run by Canadian mining companies, that is incredibly dangerous and really bad. But we don't talk about it. We should be talking about it. Some people talk about it, but it's not widely discussed. And we have had this willingness to, as a culture and society, decide who has value and who doesn't as to where we allow these things to happen. And instead, we need to start with, I believe, the human rights framework and say, okay, everybody has these rights, and then let's figure it out together. And I think it's totally possible.
Yeah, the standards of mining operations across the world are so different, and a lot of irresponsible companies will just go and do whatever they want in China or in Africa, and without looking at what they should be doing. And that's not nuclear. It's everything that mines.
Mm-hmm. It's everything that mines, and then it's the same.
Every resource. It's
the same for anything you're doing. So if you're putting anything on anyone's land, right? It's like, if we're talking about decolonization, where's the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples framework that we need in order to be talking about any sort of energy development? But that community consultation, free, prior, and informed consent, it applies to absolutely everything. And right now we're going full steam ahead on a whole bunch of things without this to start out with. And then nuclear is, I think, bogged down by a lot of misinformation and also that fear of lack of consultation and information.
It's a big company it's a large bureaucracy or a big company that needs to implement a large nuclear plant. And that has an implicit level of distrust amongst a lot of the population because of past things that corporations and large governments have done. And your distrust of government itself is, completely justified. Any large organization of people, there seems to be the possibility of going astray. I don't know, some things we need to do on a large scale, and we need to have some way to have just bureaucracies in place that aren't corrupt.
I have ideas about that too.
Very good.
Yeah, I think actually it also comes from having a physics background in wanting to look at efficiency, and not efficiency like people talk about economic efficiency, but efficiency as in like what's going to work the best. And basically, I see the whole thing as a maximization problem with a whole bunch of different inputs. And you're like, okay, what are you trying to do here? Let's get clear about what you're trying to do, and then let's actually find an equilibrium. And that's never done. So you instead have ideological arguments between scales of government, and instead of conversation of like, well, what's the system you're trying to run, and how is it going to run smoothly? So what level of government and at what scale is it going to make the most sense?
Yeah, it seems like the whole discussion at the political level is so polarized that nothing sensible can come out of it. I'm almost cynically done with that whole situation.
I think it's polarized, and it's also, so my opinion on the political system is that the entire thing is constructed to act the way it currently does. So I have a problem of the basic structure and methods of governance, because it is actually, like, other than the fact that there is massive partisan debate and division, the people in their jobs in government are set up to be kind of ineffective. And they always feel like they're beholden to another group of people, and nobody feels like they have power, and yet the power is concentrated on a few people. And they are actually, largely influenced by not very many other people in corporations. And yet a good system, especially a good system of democracy, is one that's going to be distributed and everybody's empowered. So you feel like we can actually have these conversations. We actually have agencies, communities to make decisions for ourselves. And that the government representatives don't feel like they're beholden, but rather like capable actors for the people that they care about. Because we are not getting good solutions for pretty much anything. And the discourse is, frankly, useless.
Mm-hmm. I think even in the bureaucracy, in the government bureaucracy itself, most of the incentive is to do nothing. There is no incentive to take a risk as a public servant. That's the only way you can lose your job, is if you do something, right? If you do nothing, you've got it made. There's no feedback. The incentive structure needs to change. I mean, these are good people. They're not bad people, but they're in a system that's broken.
Yep, I think that's exactly it. And the way I kind of look at it is that I don't think the system's broken. I think that's how it's constructed. It's not a good one, but I think that this is what it's supposed to be doing.
To focus power in a few people.
To focus power in a few people, and to reinforce the status quo. So the idea that what we have now is actually ideal. And that is, I think, what a lot of people are fundamentally disagreeing with. So it isn't working. But this is what the system is designed to do. So it's going to continue to do this. It's supposed to be a system that does not allow rapid change or transformational change. I think rapid change is a bit dangerous, but transformational change is important. You want to have transformational change that doesn't disrupt people's lives. That is the actual goal on the on the fine scale, not disrupt people's lives and then change them all in a positive direction. But that doesn't work. You can't get that in the system, not easily.
Oh, wow. That's a good point. I'm looking forward to you fixing it.
Oh, no.
So getting back to the nuclear discussion and the energy policy, which is important to me and a lot of my listeners, is the Green Party opposed to eco-modernism as a philosophy?
So I think that requires talking about what the Green Party is. The Green Party is a extremely democratic party. And it's also an incredibly, individual-focused party in the sense that we don't whip our votes. Every single representative of the party that's elected stands with their primary mandate is to represent the community they were elected to represent. And their job is to find out what their community needs and wants and to do the best for that. And what ties us together as a party is that we hold a certain set of core values and hopefully a unified concept of what we want the world to be like. I'm not entirely sure that we're unified on that, to be quite honest. But after going through leadership races, no, we don't. We don't have the same definitions of our values, for that matter. But that's that. So I think to say, does the Green Party have this opinion? I don't know, because it is the Green Party official policy. And the policy process is what it is, so it takes a while to get the official policy changed, but it's agreed upon by all the members. So if you want to know whether something's accepted or not, you're basically looking to see whether the entire membership can agree on something. And you're talking thousands of people. And I think that people don't always look at those policies either to find out what they are. So I think the question is really, if you were to put this forward as a concept and discuss it in the Green Party, would you get a majority of members? And I don't know, because I can't really know. But the truth is, it's going to vary person by person. So if any individual is looking to say, well, is my local Green Party going to be up for this? Get in touch with your local Green Party. Find out if the people you're organizing with are or not. And yeah, eco-modernism is going to be something that there are a lot of Greens on board for, and some who will be like, no, not at all.
So I was looking and I found an event. There's a Green Party event hosted by Fredericton MP Jenica Atwin, a Green Party roundtable to discuss nuclear issues. And I was like, wow, this is great. Green Party's discussing nuclear. I tuned in. It was anti-nuclear activist Susan O'Donnell and Gordon Edwards from the Canadian Coalition for Nuclear Responsibility. And they forgot to include the pro-nuclear person or the scientist. And it was, I could listen to the first 10 minutes and then I had to turn it off. How do we get this conversation into the Green Party or into society to look at both sides of the issue, to get a balanced representation? And I'd love to vote for the Green Party. I really would. But I've always not been able to get past the anti-nuclear bit.
Yeah. So on that, there's a couple things. One is, I think, first, Jenica Atwin is one of my most respected people ever. She's one of the most amazing people I've ever met. And my understanding is that community has a very strong set of personal reasons that make them uncomfortable with nuclear. And so that, I think, is in a way a separate conversation than how do we introduce this in the party and how do we introduce this more broadly. Because there are conversations to be had there, but I think that they're delicate. And I think that addressing this is addressing where kind of we started this, which is the polarization. In that and actually, so where I see the discourse in the party right now too, there is polarization. So that is in a sense why you're likely to hear discussions that are only one side or the other, because they don't particularly like to talk to each other because of the polarization. So you actually have the opposite.
It's
as
difficult.
Well.
It's difficult.
The other side is there as well, but they're not particularly interested in having public debate because it ends up in public argument. And I found it interesting because when I was running for leader, I was kind of willing to talk about this. And I definitely got people who were like, what are you doing? Like, no one's ever going to be okay with this. Like, like disagree with you, et cetera, et cetera. Like, we can't have that. I'm like, you're fine. I'm happy for you to say, like, no, for your community, but we need to have this conversation for the country, and everybody should be able to have this conversation. But I also got the other thing. I got angry emails telling me that my interest in finding a balance in it and wasn't acceptable, and that I had to take a much more pro-nuclear stance. And I was like, okay, well, what am I supposed to do here? So that's where I recognize the polarization, and that me saying, actually, I would like to, still support the phasing out of older nuclear plants and, the exploration of new technology, and the funding of research, and taking the care that we need to take in terms of making sure these things are not run by, SNC Lavalin, et cetera. But that I got that pushback was what taught me that the way to start this conversation is by having it with the people who are already in the middle. And to, instead of, bring together different polarized sides to kind of make their arguments, is to start by talking to people who already are kind of open to it, and to get a real solid foundation on facts and possibilities, and let that grow. And this is kind of, honestly, it's a little bit the green attitude towards policymaking in general, which is there's always a balance to be found. And when you find a balance, you're going to really irritate everybody on the fringe, but you're going to have actually made the majority of the people happy. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're seeking. So I don't particularly have the answer to how to properly start that argument, because the other issue with politics itself is that people like politics to be inflammatory. People like politics to have different sides to it. And that's in fact my hope with the Greens, is that we don't do that as much. In that what I see for the most parties, and this comes back to the issues with the setup of our governmental system, but they need the opposition parties in order to flourish. They need to have somebody to say, I disagree with you, you're wrong. It makes their arguments stronger. It makes their existence have meaning, because they carve out a place in the political spectrum. They carve out their ideologies, and then you fight over it, and you make people choose one, when most people don't actually agree with one party or another, and they would really just like a representative. And so that's the issue when something like this exists in kind of a political arena, is that people will follow that tendency to polarize. And even if the Green Party has the intention to not do that, we do, because we are part of that political system, whether we like it or not. So we will have that tendency to pick sides of issues and debate them, rather than trying to find some sort of balance in the middle within our own kind of thought, so that we can present that as some sort of solution. And that actually happened also during the leadership race and talking about gun rights. And the other thing is, nobody tends to you don't get press and attention for having a fiery opinion about something.
Or an unpopular opinion.
But if it's unpopular enough, then you do. But yeah, you get the press, maybe not the attention you want, but you get the press. But I think I think it's going to have to be local. And this is not the first reasonable conversation that I've had about nuclear, and within the Greens or within Canada in general. And I think it's one of those things that it has to be done with kind of this bringing everyone's needs and opinions to the table, and the table has to be small, and it has to be local, and it has to be, instead of ever being about imposing something on somebody, it's about finding the solutions and the interests of any particular group, but mostly local community, and seeing how those can be met. And I think whenever our needs and wants and wishes and fears are recognized and met, we then have the space to have a larger conversation. But until that's the case, it's really hard to do anything else.
Yeah, that's a good way to approach it. And that's, it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
You need popular opinion to sway?
The a lot of work thing is a huge problem. I think it's actually like one of the biggest problems that we have, and actually what was one of the reasons we founded the nonprofit that I founded with my friend. Is that what we recognize is there's a lot of hard work missing that isn't done, and this exists in a lot of different places. And a lot of it is actually the translation of academic work and research into practical applications that can be understood by anybody. But the same is here. Why do we have, such contentious discussions around extremely sensitive topics in a very public way? Say systemic racism. Because we have not found out as people how to do the difficult work of having those conversations on a personal way and in a non-argumentative way.
Yeah, it's very difficult to step out and talk to the other side as you see them, because everyone has a caricature of their opposition. And it's much easier to argue against a caricature than it is to argue against a person.
And it is.
And I found that myself. I've tried to engage anti-nuclear people, and it's so difficult to just hold my tongue and try to find a common ground. But it's what we need to do. We need to say, okay, well, we all want to get rid of fossil fuels, right? You're a scientist, I'm a scientist. We agree that fossil fuels needs to go. What's the next step? How do we get there in the best way possible to save the most lives?
And I think that's this. It comes down to the systemic issue again, where we are culturally taught, that everything has to be done through conflict.
Yes.
You have to go in there. You have to fight for your side, and somebody will win and get what they want. And that is weird. And everybody has compromise. The concept of compromise is wrong too, because we don't think, compromise means finding it somewhere we're actually legitimately in consensus. Compromise means everybody loses.
Mm.
And so nobody wants to go into these things because everybody feels like they're going to come out of it unhappy. And so the stage for negotiation is set for failure because you're not in something. You're in a conflict for the sake of it. And there is no way to get from that attitude. But the problem is that attitude absolutely is the backdrop. You have to set up a new kind of system, a new framework in order to make it possible to have that conversation. And you see this in the way that sometimes we have like televised nowadays, online somewhere, people will have really, massive debates over issues. But what is it? It's entertainment. And people are trying to score points against their opposition. They're not trying to find consensus. They're not trying to find something they can agree on. They're not trying to actually understand the other person. And I think that, one, we're stuck in that system, and the other is we've been taught to be afraid. And we've been taught to be afraid to not know something, to be wrong, to not get what we want, to quote unquote lose. And there's just like, we're going into this with our hunches raised. We're not prepared. And it's really hard. Like I can say that it's possible, but the work that actually goes into creating that environment to be able to have those conversations well is a lot of work, and it also involves kind of setting agreements with people. And to get to a point where you're even willing to set agreements with somebody is kind of a long road.
One thing you said earlier tweaked me a little bit when you said you want to shut down old nuclear plants. That is something that we're coming up against as a society in a lot of cases. The nuclear fleet that was built back in the 60s and 70s is starting to become older.
Well,
now,
I'll say that that's a wild generalization, and I think it was in talking about a particular one. And there are options between just attempting to continue it or shut it down. And I think that's actually one of the points of misconception in what you do moving forward. And I think it can be a framing issue.
Okay. There's a couple that come to mind. I know they've done the refurbishment, or going forward on refurbishing Darlington and Bruce generating facilities in Ontario. I'm not so familiar with the one in New Brunswick, and Pickering is coming to the end of its current useful life. There's a lot of discussion that I've been involved with on whether we can save Pickering and refurbish it. The current thought is that it's going to be shut down in 2024. And I was looking at, what would the impact of that be? And there's been a lot of people looking at, what happens when 24 terawatt hours of green power goes offline. And we've seen it in New York, where the natural gas comes up. Now they shut down Indian Point. We've seen it in Germany. The coal is not going away as they shut down their nuclear plants. The stable background, or the stable base load of nuclear, allows us to have more renewables, I feel.
Yes, it does. And I remember attending a presentation on basically, taking fossil fuels out of the entire U.S. connected grid, and the way to do it, and, have enough baseload power. And I think so for that, from both a personal and a political standpoint, I think that those conversations belong in the communities where those plants are. And also, with a strong dose of non-biased science. I say non-biased because I think when science itself is not, shouldn't be biased, usually is, but in the way it's presented. So it's not put forward, because I've gone to presentations done by oil companies. And it's often hard when something is presented by a corporation to know whether you can trust them or not. And so that idea of independent consulting and reality, what is this actually going to be? And also this comes also down to the communication of risk, which is something that I have been talking about also in how we talk about AI and other things. But I think that we usually think about, I'm actually also very frustrated about the conversations about risk mitigation for climate change effects as well.
Okay.
Earthquakes, all of it. Anytime we're making a decision about risk for a community, for one, no one else should be making that decision other than the people who are directly affected by it. But we think about risk in a very kind of linear way. And you're is it high risk or low risk? It's not how it works. It really is a matrix. You have different types. You're looking at, is this something that's going to be catastrophic and likely? Or is this going to be catastrophic and rare? Or is this going to be, not that big of a disruption and extremely common? Then maybe you actually should be doing something about that too. Which is the issue we have in a lot of cases, is risks that don't seem that extreme are things that we don't know how to deal with. And yet they actually cause a lot of disruption. And so when we think this low level of stuff, so that risk matrix is basically, I think, one of the things that we need to have a conversation about.
But
and then I'm
familiar.
sure, as you know, the other issue is discussing statistics. And it's been just a mess with the pandemic. Because you even have people who are talking about stuff well, because they're communicating their probabilistic information from a public health standpoint, and it's accurate. But no one has ever taught everybody in the population that they're not allowed to apply those numbers to them as an individual, because somehow that's been left out. So you have people walking around saying, I have a 3% chance of catching COVID. And I'm like, no, that is not at all what's going on. You can't just apply that to your age. And so the same thing happens, I think. So when we're talking about risk probabilities, risk mitigation, we don't have an understanding of what risk actually means, and we don't have an understanding of the probability. So even if you're saying something, probabilities don't exist in a vacuum. You're not, you exist on time scale, you exist in severity, you exist in everything. And so there is no, and we also, as people, it's just a whole bunch of compounding issues to make this difficult, but you also run up against a population, and this definitely comes up with looking at climate futures, that has no way of comprehending in a way that's comfortable, the possibilities of the future. And so what I've found is people can understand catastrophe, and people can understand things are fine. They have no room for the middle, which deals with uncertainty, but also deals with the very, very likely possibility that we're actually going to have a really horrible time, and we're going to get through it. Because nobody has been taught to face hardship. Nobody has been taught that they can make it through something. Everybody's like, oh, you're so inspirational, because I'm like, but I actually just want to get everybody to be able to face the things that I've faced without having to go through it. So people have this idea that you have to have gone through something. You have to go through something traumatic to develop the preparation for something like that. And I fundamentally disagree. We just need to prepare ourselves better for something like that. And I think it will improve the conversation if we can talk about what it actually looks like. But there's so much fear. The possibility that people can face losing their home if it means the world ends. But people can't face losing their home and having to live with that fact, because they've never been given the skills to do so.
Indeed. Wow. We have a lot of work ahead of us.
Yes.
And I think we're getting towards the end of our time slot. So I've really had a great time chatting with you. Thank you so much for coming on here and talking with me about all of this stuff. It's very interesting, and I wish you the best of luck in your future endeavors. And hopefully you can pull the Green Party along and get science in there and change the world. That would be wonderful. A last question for you. What's your favorite science fiction movie or book?
So my favorite science fiction book that I've read, because there's a lot that I haven't read that I wish that I've read, is Binti. It's the Binti trilogy. And I would suggest everybody looks it up. It is just absolutely incredible. I can't describe it.
Okay.
And in terms of movies, I don't know. I'm just a Trekkie. That's where it is.
Awesome.
You're bringing everything back to that recently.
Me too. Who's the author of Binti?
I believe her name is Nnedi Okorafor.
Very well. I'll have to look that up. Thank you so much, Amita. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. Good luck with all of your work too. It's extremely important.
Thank you. If you'd like to follow up with more in-depth discussions, please come find us on Facebook at The Rational View and join our discussion group. If you like what you're hearing, please consider visiting my Patreon page at patron.podbean.com/TheRationalView. Thanks for listening.